Hey, greetings, viewers. This is Directorship, Governance and Board Management. My name is Sam Zima. I am the Senior Executive Presenter here at the COMETSA Television Network and COMETSA Radio Worldwide. We have our subject matter expert in the studio. I am with my host, Ramavaga Avele Chimule and George Mutenda Zamera. They are going to be engaging with our guest. This is COMETSA Television Network, the mind, the journey, the destiny. We apply our mind to the journey that takes us to our destiny. We are established under the concept of the idea. We inform and entertain. We develop and educate. We empower and support. We associate and network. That is the idea. I hand over to my colleagues, Ramavaka and George, to welcome our guest and start the conversation. Over to you, colleagues.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Sam Zima. We are in the second episode of our Boardroom Talk, and we are now joined by our second expert, Ms. Carolyn Chalmers, who is the CEO of Good Governance Academy. She works extensively on corporate governance and works closely with the King report on corporate governance, and therefore she is a very capable colleague to be able to join us tonight. And secondly, we have my co-host, Josh Mutenda Zamira, who's going to be joining us to ensure that we are able to tap into the talent and the skills and the expertise of our guests to ensure that we're able to achieve more. We just want to give a sec to Ms. Carolyn Chalmers to introduce herself so that we are able to know where she's coming from.
Thank you very much. I work with Professor Mervyn King in his Good Governance Academy. I also am the chairperson of the South African Bureau of Standards Technical Committee on the Governance of Organizations. And that committee works with the International Standards Organization, as you would know them, ISO, and we are developing an international standard for corporate governance. We call it corporate governance, but internationally we're talking about the governance of organizations because, of course, it's not only for corporates. This is for all organizations of all types and sizes. So this will be the first organizational and globally accepted or international standard for the governance of organizations. We do have some standards internationally, like the OECD's standard on corporate governance, but this is the first international standard on the governance of organizations. And I head the South African delegation for that. So thank you very much for welcoming me here on your show.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you.
So is this academy the offshoot of the good work that the good expert Mervyn King been working on?
Absolutely. So South Africa, and this is something that I've come to know in working internationally in governance, is South Africa, of course, with Professor King, is way ahead of the curve, even in regards to integrated reporting, which is a requirement in South Africa, is to produce an integrated report, which is one of the cornerstones of demonstrating accountability across all the various different categories of resources, not only financial resources, but all the resources we're using. So when you say that, is it an offshoot of the good work that Professor King has done? Absolutely. So when he has traveled internationally and worked at, given speeches and stood on the podium with other international experts and spoken at universities and business schools, he was shocked to see that some business schools internationally are still teaching the old way of thinking, the 1970s approach to capital markets and governance and really issues of significant business science matters. So he wanted to create a Good Governance Academy to bring the message that we were so used to in South Africa globally to the rest of the world on matters of governance and business science. And he's done this by combining the Sustainable Development Goals, you know, the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals 4, which is education, with 17, which is coordination and collaboration. And he's pulling those two together to create this Good Governance Academy to bring the lessons that we take for granted in South Africa on what is good governance and what is this thought leadership around matters of business science. And he's taking that globally. So just as an example, in terms of the significant success we've had to date, is our last colloquium in November 2020, which of course was online. We had expert speakers talking to us about the importance of ESG. And we had over 1,000 attendees at that event from 69 countries. So already, and this is only his second year of operation, already the Academy is having a significant impact, which is really great to see that Professor King's work is not restricted to just South Africa and the African continent, but it is truly going global.
Beautiful.
That's beautiful. Excellent.
Yeah. To build on to that, I mean, this is more about capacity building. And we have gone through some tough times on COVID-19 and also on the current Judicial Commission of Inquiry on State Capture, which exposed some of the shortcomings that are happening within the governance space. So the landscape is changing. The challenges are rising and also opportunities. How do you think boards are ready to take advantage of the changing landscape and we are able to move to a better situation, and including the use of, the skills that you have to ensure that the board members are technology savvy to achieve more in terms of governance, in terms of strategic leadership, and also in terms of taking the country, whether it's in government or the private sector or entrepreneurs, the core of the economy?
You've touched on many, many diverse aspects there. I think, first of all, taking into consideration the context within which an organization operates. Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Carolyn. Carry on.
Okay, thank you. So taking into consideration those contexts. Now, I'm here. I think your signal is a bit iffy.
Yeah, I can hear. I can
we
hear
can hear you, Carolyn.
Yeah,
great.
So just go ahead.
Okay, thank you, George. So what you're pointing out is the context within which an organization operates. In the context of the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, the context of state capture and the Zondo Commission, the context of the changing technology landscape out there. And these are all significant impacts. And of course, the economy that goes, the economic impacts that are going with it. So significant impacts on the organization itself. From a governance perspective, the people that are most that need to respond really are the executive management. They are looking at internally at their organization, but of course it's not only their organization, it is their supply chain that has been impacted as well. So really the executive management need to look at and respond to the risks and opportunities, as was mentioned, both the risk and opportunities of the context and how it is affecting the strategic intentions and the strategic objectives, as well as the targets that the organization is trying to achieve. The board's role in that, from that perspective, is to make sure that the executive management and management know what the parameters are within which to work, in which to operate. And those parameters need to be well articulated in the principles about, really it's about what are the right things to do. Management is looking at the right way in which to respond. The board meeting 4-6 times a year can't determine the right way to respond, but certainly the board should be determining what are the right things to do. So when you hear what's happening through the Zondo Commission, for example, definitely a response from a board perspective is to consider, have we put down the parameters on what constitutes ethical behavior in our organization? What is acceptable behavior? And then when it comes to something like COVID-19 and the pandemic, what are we doing to support society? What are we doing to support our own employees? So those are questions that it's going to ask of the executive management. So really, it's a two-way street. Executive management needs to respond to that ongoing, those environmental factors that sit in the, and let me use the acronym ESG, in the environmental and social side of things, as well as the technology side of things, the changes that are in the environment. So executive management is responding to those things, while the board is providing clear parameters within which that executive management is to respond. Of course, the board has delegated authority to executive management and is expecting executive management to report to them on what they're doing and how the details of how they are responding within the parameters that have been given. So that's really the board's role at a high level.
Yeah, Carolyn, the term VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. This is the term VUCA where we are now. The environment is so complex. And now tell me, how does that apply to the strict application of governance rules and practices? Because now boards have to be agile in this environment. Maybe your take on that?
So this is the differentiator between governance in South Africa and the African continent versus governance in the American continent. So in the United States, governance is prescriptive or prescribed in legislation, the Sarbanes-Oxley. You heard of SOX, right? And so it is a compliance requirement. In South Africa and in most parts of the rest of the world, governance is really not a compliance requirement. But you could think of it this way: governance is about doing the right thing, whereas compliance is what you must do, and governance is what you should do. So compliance really in legislation sets the minimum socially acceptable standard. What we're striving for is what we should be doing. I take, for example, in a Starbucks in the UK, a high street coffee shop. Oh yes, we've got them in South Africa now too. Starbucks had structured their tax in the right way, in compliance with legislation, but in such a way that in the United Kingdom, they didn't have to pay a lot of tax. Now, the high street coffee buyer thought that that's not what you should be doing. Who's paying for the streets? Who's paying for the water system? Who's paying for the electrical grid? It's the citizens now, because you're not contributing. So they stopped buying coffee. They went on strike because Starbucks wasn't contributing tax to the government and wasn't contributing to society. So in their eyes, Starbucks wasn't doing what they should be doing. They were doing what they must be doing, which is compliance, but they weren't doing what they should be doing. Now, governance talks to that. So when it comes to VUCA, when it comes to all of this stuff that's happening, compliance legislation tends to be behind the curve. So legislation, what you must be doing, really sits a bit behind the curve. So if we think about POPIA, the Protection of Private Information Act in South Africa, and there's legislation that's coming through across the world in terms of privacy. But privacy issues, we started talking about with Google, and you heard about Cambridge Analytica, and you hear about all of these cyber breaches and even Wi-Fi breaches. This has been happening for many, many years, and where privacy has been compromised prior to the Act coming out. All the Act did was say to us, what is the minimum acceptable? What is acceptable to society at a minimum? But what we should have been doing is we should have been ahead of the curve and embracing this environment within ethical rules and within ethical parameters to say, how can we use these opportunities? how can we address the downsides and the impacts and the risks associated with using all of this information. So being flexible and being agile really is what governance allows you to do. It's not what compliance allows you to do. Compliance brings a level of inflexibility. But of course, in a car, if you have the accelerator, your most important tool is your brake. So governance might be giving you your accelerator, but you have to have your brake as well. So that's the governance side and the compliance side. And of course, risk is what you're assessing with both. And that's where the acronym, the GRC, comes in, the governance, risk, and compliance. They all work in tandem to make sure that we can leverage the opportunities presented to us and minimize the downsides in this VUCA kind of uncertain world. And maybe on VUCA, a really interesting thing that's just started coming about is there's a man in Ireland. His name is Peadar Duffy, a real Irish name, and it's Peter, but it's spelled P-E-A-D-A-R, right? Peadar. And Peadar Duffy has just recently put out a paper on quantum risk. And quantum risk talks about this inability to understand risk in our very, very uncertain world. And if you want to go to paper, he's published it on LinkedIn. So on LinkedIn, you can have a look at this paper on quantum risk. And it's about leveraging the opportunities and minimizing the downside in this very uncertain environment.
Wow. Just following up on the issue of POPIA, take it as an example, as an in-country requirement, a compliance requirement with the way we go around handling information. But then having to also find yourself doing business in other parts of the world where they have even much stricter compliance requirements. I think the European Union one is an example. So am I right to say that if you are a South African company operating in global markets, it's not enough for you to say, I'm complying with POPIA, because POPIA might just have a lesser restrictions vis-a-vis the markets out there where you are also operating. And that could be challenging for organizations, right?
Absolutely. So compliance is it's a big investment, because if you are operating internationally, and even if you're not, there are certain international legislations because of our national participation with international trade. There is international legislation that affects us. So so you're referring to the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation out of the EU. That came about, that was in place long before POPIA came to be. And in fact, POPIA is only really coming in force in early this year. So GDPR, how does that affect a South African organization or an organization in Botswana? So any organization that has any kind of trade agreement in the EU. Well, the issue is that anyone who's a European, an EU citizen, okay, let's not UK now, right? Brexit. Anyone who's a UK citizen or any organization that's doing business in EU, and they happen to have some data in your database, right? You don't know how it came about, and you're not identifying that information as EU originated information. And if you're not able to identify it and manage it differently and according to GDPR, then your whole database needs to be managed according to GDPR, because you can't identify only that EU data. So in fact, South Africa had to be compliant with GDPR a long time before we even had to be compliant with POPIA, mainly because we can't tell whether the data has come from EU or not, unless you've got some kind of flag in your database that says this is EU data, treat it differently, which most times we didn't.
So to a certain extent, then the GDPR becomes a global standard.
Absolutely.
Because everybody else does business with the European Union.
Yes. If you a plumber that's working out of Soweto, and you've got a small client database, maybe not. But certainly if you're a large plumbing organization and you're employing 15, 20 plumbers, and one of your clients happens to be a consulate in Sandton, an EU consulate, well, there, you've got EU data.
Wow, sure.
It's quite interesting, Carolyn. But now let's look at the human factor in connection with now access to these technologies. Because if now boards in South Africa have to be competitive and relevant and responsive to the challenges that are imposed on them to provide strategic leadership, what kind of systems and what kind of initiatives can be adopted to ensure that our board members, even in terms of our executives and our compliance guys, in terms of auditors, are competent and fluent in technology to ensure that these dynamics can be managed effectively, efficiently, and to the betterment of achievement of strategic goals of any organization, whether in government and also in the private sector, especially looking at entrepreneurship as the new lever of bringing growth and employment into the mainstream of the economy. What is it that can be done differently?
I'm talking as if I know it all. Of course, I don't know it all. And there are lots of opinions out there. So I'm just giving you my thoughts today, of course. So technology specifically it's my area of expertise. So it's an area where I spend a lot of time researching, reading. So I can give you an expert opinion on this. So first of all, in terms of technology at a board level or a governing body level, it's not expected that the directors know how to do things, but they do need to know about things. So they need to know enough to be able to understand when their executive management is talking to them about technology as it pertains to this achieving the strategy, or issues with risk or opportunities that they want to take. So there needs to be a level of digital literacy in the boardroom. Now, if you've got directors who aren't even able to use their iPads very well to read or their tablets to read their board packs, those people are going to have an inherent disadvantage at understanding what your management is telling you about using technology in the organization. So you want to have a level of directors who is using technology, who understands the issues and the problems, and is able to grapple and puts time towards grappling and seeing the benefit from these technologies. So that's one. It's just a level of digital literacy is needed in the boardroom. But what Professor King always says is when we talk about diversity in the boardroom, we hear about diversity, about gender diversity, racial diversity, even stakeholder diversity in terms of, in labor or consumers having a voice at the boardroom. But what we don't talk about that's really important in today's age is that generational diversity. We should be looking at not having, and I call them cotton tops, right? Gray people like us, the cotton tops are the gray-haired people sitting on the board. We need to have generational diversity as well. We need those young whippersnapper upstarts who give us a hard time. We need them in the boardroom as well. And whether it's in the boardroom itself or at least in one of the board committees to keep us on our toes, we need them, because they're going to give us the deep insights that are required. We don't need to be coders. We don't need to know how to plug in servers or know all of this terminology, but we need to know how these things hang together when it comes to the strategy and what are the right things to be doing. So as long as directors know, information should be secured. And then we ask executive management, now, how are you securing your information? private information should be kept private. Now, executive management, how are you making sure that private information is being kept private? And in that explanation from management, there needs to be a level of digital literacy that understands whether this is good enough or there's some problems. Of course, you were talking about risk and audit and assurance. The board does rely on its assurance providers to give assurance that what management is telling them, it's all fine, really is all fine. And that means that your assurance providers really do need to know their stuff when it comes to technology. So we saw a huge uptick in the audit firms having to become skilled at IT audit, at being able to do IT audits. And of course, we're going to get more and more the need to understand information and information security, privacy, information architecture, and being able to audit that side of things as well. And if that's not bad enough, we've got sitting in technology is not only financial information, right? So auditing financial information, but that's what did they? A KPMG report said that 9% of of information sitting in corporate databases is financial information. And if boards are spending 90% of their time on 9% of the data, we have a problem. So we need to be looking at all of that non-financial data as well. So when it comes to digital literacy, it's understanding that the technology actually holds everything, holds all of this information, the intellectual property, the human capital information, the information in terms of how you're training, and all of that kind of information is sitting in technology. Now, how to extract it out of the technology and use it for decision-making purposes, that's really important. That's key to the boardroom, is being able to have the right information at the right time to make decisions. And that's where technology is enabling the boardroom. So not only must you make decisions about the organization, you need to make decisions in terms of the boardroom itself.
While you're talking, I brought to mind something about training. So in terms of your governance principles, do you place an obligation on companies to train boards, or is it something that a clever and wise company would do to get their cotton tops up to speed?
Absolutely. So the King report, King 4, does talk about continual improvement, board assessments, making sure that the right skills are in place. So it is very much entrenched in the King report, and certainly in the ISO standards that we're busy developing now, ISO 37000, continual improvement is built into that as well. So the need to continually develop is really important. You can't sit on your laurels. You can't say, I was an audit partner and I'm a retired audit partner now, and I know everything there is to know. Well, audit partners know that with the bringing in of IFRS, suddenly the International Financial Reporting Standards, suddenly the world changed. The reporting around financials isn't how it was before. And so we're seeing now in the press with the changing, the standardization of the non-financial reporting. Boards need to be on top of that. So here we've got the global reporting initiatives, their methodologies, that's GRI, we've got SASB, we've got all the different standards that are out there in terms of CDP, CDSB, the climate disclosures, and all of those kinds of non-financial information is currently being standardized. I really hope boards are on top of that to understand that soon they're going to have to be reporting on non-financial information as well, because they're accountable for everything in the organization, all the information, all the processes, all the people. So they better know how to do it. So yes, when you think about training, is it formal training? There is a level of that. But I think just a director in assuming the position, in saying, yes, I will be a director of the organization, it means that you you're committed to continually wanting to know more or needing to know more. So you are committed to continually improving. That's what it means to be a director in today's world. You can't retire. You have to have your finger on the pulse.
Wow, I have the two follow-up questions to the role that technology plays in the board. How much is the level of the technology literacy of the board is a reflection of where the entire organization is in as far as uptake of technology? That's the first question. The second question is, do you expect that as a result of the role that technology plays in the boardroom, that we will end up having actually a shortage of qualified board members just down the line? And what is your academy doing to address those two?
Just before you respond, Carolyn,
yes,
in terms of percentage-wise, when you look at corporate South Africa, I mean, in terms of government, what's the percentage of digital literacy in the board and executives? If we rank it between 0 to 100%, to be able to get a context of the challenge that we're dealing with.
So I haven't done the assessment myself, and I haven't seen that assessment, any results on that assessment. But I know that ISACA, the ISACA is an organization that's based in the US. There's a South African chapter, and they work in the area of, they've got a standard called the COBIT framework, which is an IT standard, IT governance standard. And they work with a lot of organizations in understanding how literate the organization is from a governance perspective and a management perspective. So I'm taking hearsay. I don't have the specific percentages, but from those presentations, what I'm seeing is that a large majority of organizations, and I'm taking the listed and the non-listed organizations, the large majority of companies do not have literate boards. In terms of a collective, and I'm not saying that they are qualified in any kind of IT qualification, but they're not digitally literate in the ability to govern the technology in the organization. So the boards are being led by the executive management, and they're trusting the executive management and their assurance providers potentially more than they ought to. So we are seeing certainly an uptick in trying to get digital literacy happening in the boardroom. But that is all up to the individual themselves to want to embrace technology. So if the individual themselves is not moving towards embracing this digital literacy, then the board is going to be forced to assess its skill set and replace that director or those directors with other directors who can, because there is a need for the skill in the boardroom. And whether that is by bringing in those younger generations to provide that literacy, those people who have grown up with a cell phone in their hands, or whether it's just bringing in more digitally literate board members, older generation, that's also fine. But boards have to bring in digital literacy into their boardrooms, and far more rapidly than our boards are currently doing now. If you think of just the listed Johannesburg Stock Exchange or Stock Exchange listed organizations, I'm sure, in terms of what I've heard, you're looking at a very small percentage that aren't digitally literate. The vast majority have a level of digital literacy. They are aware that if they're not embracing this new technologies in the environment, they're not competing effectively. And their shareholders know it. And their shareholders are going to demand that literacy from them. Now, non-listed organizations who don't have that level of shareholder activism are really only driven by the chairman assessing the organization, assessing the board effectiveness in terms of overseeing technology matters. So where is the incentive to change? That's where we need to look at that when it comes to digital literacy in the boardroom. As I say, it's not just being able to code, it's being able to make decisions about technology. You mentioned around the using technology in the boardroom. Was that actually making the boardroom more effective? Because there was something that we spoke about in the ISO committees, in the standards organization, and it really came out of Japan, where they were saying, what about an AI, an artificial intelligence director? Certainly a programmed or a technology that makes decisions, surely they're going to be less biased or treat all the information equally, whereas a person, a human, would be far more subjective. Of course, we know when in dealing with AI that there's upsides and downsides to that. The upside is, yes, certainly all the information is going to be treated potentially equally, but the downside is that there isn't that gut feel that comes into it, that humans tend to know more than they code into their systems. So a very interesting debate we had at ISO about, can we have a digital director, in an AI director in the boardroom? And actually, internationally, we've agreed that governance is a human-based system. Governance cannot be done at our current understanding, our current consensus position is that we can't have governance being done by artificial intelligence, because there isn't that factor, that unknown that people bring into it, that what should I be doing? Certainly AI can definitely do the must do. Here are the rules, follow the rules. But we're talking about governance, which is more than rules. This is understanding what you should be doing, more than what you must be doing. So it's a human-based system, is governance. So that's an interesting take on. We had to have a lengthy debate internationally about, can you have a digital director? I mean, a truly digital director.
Or can we have a combination of digital directors and humans?
Yes, now that's a very good question. So certainly a lot more intelligence can be built into the reports that we receive as directors. So executive management is giving us reports and they're summarizing the information. Now, those summaries, what level of interpretation, and is that interpretation explicit? If you were to slap an algorithm on top of the data, that algorithm is absolutely specific, it's explicit, and it's transparent. Anyone can go and have a look and audit that algorithm that's placed on top of it. But if you have a CEO saying, okay, don't report that number in this, it's a day late, or I do want it in these financial results, let's just bring it forward a day. I mean, what's a day? Now, an algorithm wouldn't do that, so it wouldn't be in your report. But a person could make those changes. So interestingly, I think if you wanted to, the trustworthiness and the transparency of interpretation on top of your data, directors should be looking more at algorithms around that. That being said, that's the fact. Why we appoint good people in executive positions is because I don't only need fact, I need opinion. I'm not there as a director all day, every day, trying to understand what's going on. I don't only want the facts, I want their expert opinion. And I can't get that from AI. So there's still a need for people. And this is what, when I talk to executives, I say to them, make sure that in your reports to the board, you bring through your humanness, because otherwise one day you're going to be replaced. If you don't give your opinion, and don't be scared in giving your opinion, just mark it as my opinion. If you don't give your opinion, you can be outsourced. You can be replaced with technology. It's your opinion that counts. So give the board your opinion.
So
there's no
chance to fall asleep in the boardroom because AI is on the sideline to take over from you.
Absolutely, it's knocking.
How about outsourcing the entire secretarial work to AI?
So again, there is certainly, when it comes to the compliance requirements, compliance is what you must do, and there are rules about how you do that. Compliance can be automated, right? As long as you've got the right things in. But company secretarial is far more than just compliance. They are governance professionals, as what the King reports call it, right? Our company secretaries or our governance professionals, they are giving us governance advice and opinions on governance matters. So they should be people. There's a human element because they're giving opinions and they're not giving always the fact. And the board is looking to the company secretary for that kind of opinion. SIPC submissions into your company house, your legal submissions into SARS. Yeah, we've got e-filing today. We've got all sorts of technologies that can enable that. But when it comes to governance matters, we want the human aspect still. Absolutely, there is a competitive advantage to that.
Is there
in
any
terms of in terms of trying to manage conflict of interest, that normally leads to corruption activities in every, board governance issues, and in terms of ensuring that there is that good governance. Don't you think that AI will be able to give more insights, and whether it's actual or perceived or potential conflicts that may be identified earlier to ensure that we are able to limit the prospects of corruption and some of these malpractices that are affecting our good corporate citizenship too much?
Very good question. So conflict of interest is a big issue, and it is one that I think we are really grappling with, because we are tying ourselves up, we're tying our hands behind our backs with red tape when it comes to conflict of interest. Just because you have a conflict of interest doesn't mean you can't do business with that organization or with that person. It just means that the person making the decision can't be party to that decision. They can't influence the decision in any way. We're trying to get unbiased decision making. And to your point, you can get technology to help you with unbiased decision making. Absolutely. Be careful, because sometimes we build in unintentionally, we build in biases in our algorithms. So we need to have a mechanism to be able to test our algorithms on all sorts of data. So when you're using AI, don't just assume that because you understand the algorithm that it's going to be unbiased. There could be unintended consequences. So you need to be transparent with what that algorithm is saying, and you need to test it. And you need to test it in all circumstances and continually test it and monitor it as our data sets change, as the context changes. So yes, AI can absolutely help us in decision-making and unbiased decision-making, as long as we're clear on the transparency of those algorithms and that we're testing for bias on those algorithms. But it can help us to make those unbiased decisions. When we're dealing with conflict of interest, the issue for us is around transparency, is not hiding that there's a conflict and not being party to the decision being made. Those are the two big tenets about conflict of interest. And the Companies Act puts it out very clearly when it talks about conflict of interest, and it talks about the business judgment rule and not being conflicted when making a decision. So really, I would, for all sizes and types of organizations, they can pull that text out of the Companies Act. It's very good text. We have some confusion in the PFMA, for example, around this decision-making and tendering and conflicts of interest. I think we are creating far too much red tape, and we are actually hindering business. We are hindering business because we're not dealing with the conflict of interest in the right way. It's transparency, honesty, and unbiased decision making is what we're looking for. A conflict of interest is fine as long as it's acknowledged and it's managed properly and it's not involved in the decision making. So we need to be transparent about our conflicts. It's where it's not transparent that we have an issue.
So we can assume that all these challenges that you are sharing with us, you have some sort of interventions at the academy to assist organizations that want to respond to them, right? Do you want to share with us?
First of all, I must caveat what I said just now, and I'm not a lawyer. I'm an IT person. So when I say conflict of interest and I refer to legislation, please run to the legislation because I'm not the lawyer. I always, my basis is in that, my reading of law. So I'm not a lawyer, so no legal opinions here. So going to the Good Governance Academy, we're 2 years old. We started off presenting 2 colloquia a year. So that's really where academics and corporate and business people can come together and talk about matters of business science. So we've spoken about, for example, corporate leadership. We've spoken about integrated reporting. We've spoken about the ESG, environment, social governance, in our colloquium on the 13th of May this year. So save the date, 13th of May. We're having a colloquium, and that's about enterprise value creation. And that's really around pivoting and creating value that's not always on a financial, we're not reporting on a financial basis, but we're considering what value is. So we're reimagining value in the organization. And that's our May colloquium. And we have our colloquiums twice a year. So there's going to be a November colloquium as well. Now, we haven't announced what we're speaking about in November, but our purpose is around matters of governance and business science. So you can be assured that November's topic is going to be something that's incredibly relevant and that needs thought leadership in that moment in time. Right now in May, what Prof. King believes is essential for thought leadership is enterprise value creation. So that is currently the Good Governance Academy business model. We have 2 events a year. Our support members, they alert their membership that we have, like your listeners, your radio listeners, you alert your radio listeners to the fact that these events are happening. Our support members, such as the Institute of Directors in India, Institute of Directors in the United Kingdom, the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales, many support organizations. They tell their members about our colloquia, and then we hold our colloquia of these business issues, and then after the event, we send out memoranda. And this is just a summary of that colloquium. That's our current business model. We have got some exciting changes in the pipeline, better leveraging technology to access everybody, so that everybody has equitable access to this thought leadership. Of course, GGA is a public interest organization, so we are a not-for-profit company constituted in South Africa, and our purpose is really around for the public good. So we're trying to get to as many people as possible. And today's world, well, that means technology. So we're going to, besides using our webinars and online 2 colloquia a year, watch this space. We're going to be bringing some exciting new services and products to the market shortly.
Wow. We are excited about that. Thanks for sharing with us and our viewers and listeners.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Carolyn. So from your parting statement, you believe that there's still room for collaboration, but there is collaboration taking place amongst role players in governance to empower, strategic leadership and governance within our boards, management, and the auditing fraternity to ensure that there's continual improvement of performance from all aspects.
Absolutely. So it's one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and that's 17. And I would say, personally, this is the most important goal that we have. And that's to move away from competition and fighting and move towards collaboration and building something better. And we see that when we had these vaccines in a tremendously reduced timescale to create the vaccines. We had global collaboration. And we see wherever we have collaboration, we have a rapid move towards something that's better. And we need to move towards collaboration rather than competition. So, for example, when we have governance practitioners across the world and they are trying to compete for business, in fact, we should be collaborating together. There is so much business, but we're so busy fighting each other that we should rather be, if we were rather collaborating and creating a single environment where we can then service our clients better. Wouldn't that be better? Now, I must be careful because now we're getting into antitrust and anti-competitive and the Competitions Act and all of that kind of stuff. So let me keep quiet. I'm not the lawyer, so let me keep quiet on that. But certainly, we need to move to a world that moves away from competition only into a more collaborative space, which is the UN Development Goal.
Abel uses the word competition.
Competition.
But I must tell you, though, that in my other life, I was a competition lawyer. And there will be exceptions. There will be exceptions where, in fact, there is benefit for everyone all around. But that's a subject for another day. I just wanted to thank you and say, your subject requires not just today, it requires another day to have a go at it again, because there's so much that we need to ask and for the listeners to hear. So hopefully one day we can drag you back and see if we can carry on with this.
It would be my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for that opportunity. Definitely. You're welcome.
Thanks, Carolyn. And thanks, George. Thanks, Prasam. We have a strategy 101 conversation next week, Wednesday. And just to leap on to what George was saying, maybe during one of our strategy sessions, we can have you, Carolyn, because of the vital link between governance and strategy to ensure that our boards and our boardrooms, whether it's the public sector or the private sector, continually reinvent themselves to deliver more value to its citizens and to its, what we call their stakeholders. So thanks a lot, listeners. We appreciate you tuning in to COMETSA Radio and look forward to your continual support. Now I will hand over to our executive producer, Mr. Sam Zima, to wrap up today's events. But we appreciate your contribution, Carolyn Chalmers.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. It's been wonderful. We have learned a lot, and there's still more to learn. And thanks to George and Abel for engaging you so professionally. I'm sure you felt comfortable to share with our viewers and the listeners. Yes, indeed, we are looking forward to engaging with you in the future. And good luck to great work that is lying ahead in May and November. We will certainly be checking on you, and hopefully we can get some of your colleagues to come to the platform and share more. We will still play this audio of this interview this evening at COMETSA Radio Worldwide. Those who want to listen to it, they can go to www.cometsaradio.com. Thank you very much, and greetings to our colleagues at the GDA. Start the acronym.
GGA, yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. All the best. Goodbye.